Hey, brand builders, ready to take your brand to the next level? I'm Dana Ammons, and welcome to the Brand Blueprint. Welcome back to another episode of the Brand Blueprint podcast, where we break down the key steps in brand building, marketing, and business strategy for entrepreneurs. I am your host, Dana Ammons, and today we are talking about a space that is absolutely on fire right now. And that is such an appropriate time to talk about two things that are probably not something we talk about a lot on the show, which are emerging sports and emerging trends in sports, but combining that conversation with the topic of athlete business and branding. And no better than the expert that is joining me today to help us talk about that topic and break it down. She is someone who's not just shaping the future of the professional women's hockey league, but she's also fighting for better opportunities, representation, and branding for athletes in the sport. I'm thrilled to introduce Krista Kerth. She is a sports agent and branding strategist who has carved out an impressive career in the world of professional hockey representation. Now, Krista started out working for a major NHL agency, which we'll talk a little bit about in the interview, before deciding to actually go out and build her own firm. And specifically, she is focused on empowering female athletes, securing long-term partnerships for her athletes and clients, and changing the business of women's hockey. She has also worked with some of the top talents in the sport, and that's not just women's hockey, but also men's hockey. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. She's not just on the women's side, but a talent that is actually working in both leagues. And she's helping them do more than just branding. She's helping them navigate contracts, gain sponsorship deals, and build their personal branding strategies. So we are looking forward to talking to Krista today, not just about her expertise in that broad area, but number one, why branding matters for athletes and why founders should think like athletes. And similarly, I think founders sometimes forget about their power as their own standalone brand and how that can actually help propel their business. And so Krista's going to help us demystify a little bit of that. We'll also talk a little bit about the evolution of women's hockey and the rise of the PWHL. And I know for many of you casual sports fans, you may have been vaguely aware of the fact that there was a professional women's hockey league that recently formed, but not totally up to speed on where that league is and what's happening. And Krista's here today to actually give us an exciting update there. And then lastly, the business of athlete sponsorships, what it takes to land deals and build partnerships. And that matters not just for the athlete, but for founders who want to engage athletes as brands and leverage those sponsorships and partnerships to grow their own brands. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how that is actually transformed and evolved during the course of her career. And then lastly, just lessons for entrepreneurs and how to take control of your own brand in a competitive space. So without further ado, Krista, thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Dana. I'm excited to be here and have this conversation with you.
I am excited to have you as well. I know we connected last month and just had a really long conversation and touched on a couple of really great topics, some of which don't even apply technically to the show topic. We talked a little bit about the difference of living in Canada versus the US and some of our respective backgrounds with sports and cold weather. But today I am excited because we are here to focus on your expertise in sports marketing, athletic branding, and just also broadly the growth of a really exciting new league in terms of professional women's hockey. So before we get started, I want to go through our rapid fire question and answer segment first. That's an opportunity for our guests to get to know you a little bit better. So are you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
All right, let's jump in. First, right off the bat, one of the popular questions I ask here in the U.S. because of our U.S. customs is the classic coffee or tea. Now, I'm going to ask you the same question. You give me your answer, but then give me the framework in which it might be either similar or different to how we actually approach that habit in the U.S.
For me, it's tea.
It's tea. Okay, very nice. Now, have you been a lifelong tea drinker, or did you switch from coffee to tea?
Never been a coffee drinker. Never liked the taste of it and had to put so much sugar in it that it just was sort of losing its essence. So I've always been a tea drinker and recently a matcha drinker. And I always like to start my day with something nice and warm because it is quite cold here this time of year. So
That is very true. Now, very interesting. I'm a tea drinker as well. Now, I migrated from coffee to tea for similar reasons. I think I only drank coffee to begin with because when my corporate career was in every room, every meeting place, that typically was what they provided. The tea offerings were really meager. It was always kind of like a hot water container, and then they'd have like this little wicker basket, right? Like with two really like weak looking Lipton tea bags and maybe one, kind of black tea, and you just kind of like, oh, okay, I'll just go with the coffee. But then when I
yeah.
finally did make the full switch to tea, primarily because I think coffee was really hurting me from a digestive standpoint, I had to quit drinking it. I found that also tea can actually be more invigorating from a caffeine standpoint than coffee can. I drink green tea and I mix it a little bit sometimes with some non-caffeinated teas to give it more flavor. But green tea in and of itself is a much more efficient way to get caffeine than coffee is. So I've always been fascinated by that. Now, would you say in your area of the world that split is fairly similar? More people on coffee or more people on tea?
I would say more of the people in my network are still on coffee. Yeah.
That's
But they're waking up to the fact that coffee is maybe not the best for them
yeah.
in their lives. And so I feel like there's a lot of people that are considering making that switch. But
Now, do energy drinks play a big part in this? And the reason I ask, as somebody who's very involved in a pro and amateur athletic endeavors, I know just from extension of other parents that parent hockey life is a very early morning, early riser lifestyle, and like caffeine clearly must be a key part of any hockey parent's life. And I would imagine once the player gets to the pros, maybe even so. So is coffee a big play there? Have they transitioned heavily to energy drinks like many have in the US? What's kind of the secret sauce for those players?
Yeah, I mean, definitely when you have a young child playing hockey in Canada, you are getting up at 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning to head over to the rink when it's minus 20 degrees Celsius. You will stop at Tim Hortons on your way to the rink for sure.
Yep.
My son, fortunately, is of the age now where we have the evening hockey times, so a lot more flexibility there. But coffee, I think, is could become a bit of a culture here, especially in Calgary, where I live. Lots of amazing boutique coffee shops that just create community and a place to sort of come together and spend time together. I find with the younger kids, the energy drinks are more popular.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of parents, especially in this market, are paying attention to sugar intake.
As they should.
The healthiness of these energy drinks. So that's something that we pay attention to in my house. But I mean, they're idols, they're idols like the Connor McDavids of the world are representing some of these energy brands. Brands
sponsored by them. Yeah.
Exactly. And so these kids pay attention to that often as well. Yeah.
That's amazing.
It becomes a novelty to them.
Now, let's stay with hockey. Let's talk a little bit and go back a little bit farther. What is your favorite hockey memory, either as an agent or as a fan?
My favorite hockey memory. My favorite hockey memory is probably attending my very first professional women's hockey league game, which would have been at the start of last season in Ottawa, Ontario.
Yeah.
And I've been to a million NHL games in my career.
Yeah.
The energy in that arena was unlike anything I've ever experienced before. And for me, that was the start of realizing, I arrived for the pre-skate, which most fans really don't, unless it's young kids with posters wanting pucks flipped over the glass to them. This place was full. It was packed. Everyone was already in their seats. They were watching these women come out. The energy around that pre-skate was just absolutely incredible. And the whole game was, it brought tears to my eyes because for me, it was that moment where I realized that this was something that was going to pave the way for young girls around the world going forward in the future. So that's probably
I love that.
One of my favorite memories. Yeah.
I love that. Now, switching gears just a little bit, one thing that people totally misunderstand about what a sports agent actually does.
One thing that people misunderstand, it's not just about taking clients for dinner.
Or yelling, "Show me the money." I feel like most people's references, right, is that famous, "Show me the money." Like people think that that's what an agent does.
I do have people say that to me at least once a month in my network.
Tom Cruise. Shout out to Tom Cruise.
Exactly. Right. I think that being an agent is evolving. I think that clients are waking up to the fact that it's not just about an agent negotiating you a contract and then waiting until it expires and coming back around to be available to renegotiate that next contract.
Yeah.
I think now it's more about building relationships and connections. I personally, in my space, am really trying to evolve what it means to be an agent and how these young women are represented. I think it's so important that they have, that female presence in their corner to really stand for them in the ways that they need to be stood up for as this league formulates and as the sport, really transitions to being professional in every single sense of the word. I also think that I personally treat these women like my family members. They've met my son. They've spent time with him. We know each other very intimately, and I'm a very high touch agent, is how I typically describe it. I communicate a lot, and I make sure that's really clear to the clients that I work with. This is my style. You're going to be hearing from me a lot, like multiple times a week. So if that's too much, let me know. But I want to make sure that they just have that strong support in their corner because that's so important in this space right now.
I agree. I mean, especially for young athletes, right? With all of the risk and the danger and the craziness out there that has been exposed in professional and collegiate sports and amateur sports over the last, 10 years or so, especially at the collegiate level with young ladies. As a girl dad, I especially am sensitive to more women being in the room, number one. Not to say that, and I know people, some people always throw you the counter, playing devil's advocate. Well, women can, whatever. Like, more women need to be in the room in positions of authority, I think. More accountability around those women's voices when they do say, hey, this wasn't right, or this felt wrong, or this didn't happen the right way, right? And then the follow through that then results in systematic changes versus just Band-Aid approaches of, oh, we expelled so-and-so, or oh, we've removed so-and-so, and then these people kind of show up in other systems. So I love that dedication because that means an agent like you, as a partnership in a long-term relationship, can be there to give advice and perspective that a young athlete just won't frankly have for lack of not being in the room long enough. Right. So it's such a great point. Now, staying in the athlete space, if you could rep any athlete in history, living or dead, who would it be?
Oh, wow. What an interesting question. You know what? I really recently have been resonating with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
I'm a big NFL football fan.
Yeah.
And I resonate with his lifestyle and the way he's approached the mental side of his game and how he separates himself from being this football player and being this individual human. And
who is on the verge of a transitional decision here, Krista. This is actually perfect timing in this hypothetical because he just was released 2 days ago, or at least it was announced the Jets intend to release him. So you, as his potential, because we can kind of assume he might be actually in the point of pivoting to a new agent and a new outlook on his next couple of years. But it's a great point for you as an agent. How do you talk to somebody who's at the end of their stardom and their brand in sports and then help them see the upcoming need to pivot and what you can provide them as an agent?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the work that I do, I work with my clients to really uncover who they are at their deepest core. I'm sure Aaron has done a lot of that work personally already. In terms
we heard some of his work. He went out in the desert and got the ayahuasca.
Yeah, exactly. The soul-seeking, plant medicine, really discovering who he is. But we do that work in a workshop format where I always use the concept of an onion. We're really peeling back the layers of who these athletes are to get back to their core, to help them understand what's really important to them. And I think that's where we always have to turn inward and look at ourselves and say, what is really important to me? If this all goes away tomorrow, what's important to me?
Right.
And I always steer my athletes in that direction. I always say that we are our own brand. You are your own brand. I am my own personal brand. And these athletes are their own brands. And the way we represent ourselves really needs to come from who we are in our souls. Mm-hmm. And when we help them uncover that, we can steer them in the right direction with everything they do in their career. Brands they align with, appearances they do, how they represent themselves, out there in the public relations world. So what the advice I would give there is to really do that inner work, that soul searching, that seeking, and know that the best time to build your life after sport is while you're in your sport, because that is when you're relevant and that is when the opportunity is there. And then we all know inevitably this is going to end for athletes, whether that be early due to injury or just inevitably, young new crop of talent comes into play. So now is the time to harness your personal brand, to elevate that success so that you are set up for life after sport, because there is an element of anxiousness and fear because of that identity you've created around yourself as an athlete.
Yeah.
And I think that the work,
no matter how successful or not successful.
Absolutely.
Right?
I think the work that he's doing is really inspiring, and a lot of athletes should pay attention to that, because in the middle of being at the height of his career, he was figuring out who he was separate of his career. Mm-hmm. And a lot of athletes, I think, are scared to face that because they identify so deeply with being a football player or being a hockey player or being a basketball player.
And the demands that go with it. And you and I talked about this, and I know, the crowd was watching and thinking like, hey, I thought this was supposed to be rapid fire, but this has been this is back to my point, such a fascinating point that we've stumbled on here. I want to just kind of take it a little further. I love this because I come from an athletic family. You and I talked about this before, and I know the danger of, back to the point of regardless of achievement in said sport, the danger of someone becoming so immersed in the sport that when you ask that critical question of peeling those layers back and really understanding who you are, sometimes the answer that comes back to you is either I don't know who I am outside of this sport, or this is who I am, right? Like, how many times have you heard from a client, hey, we've peeled the layer back. This is who you really are. You're passionate about art. You love like theater. You're into culinary. And that person keeps saying to you, nah, really, I'm still literally hockey. That's who I am. That's who I'll always be, right? How do you approach that athlete? And this is really a two-part question, because you are, I think, on the verge of a new forefront, which is, how do you have that conversation with today's athlete, which is primarily male, in your case, to now, where do you think that conversation goes when your client is primarily female? Because I've got my own thoughts on how women might accept that feedback versus men, but I'm just curious for somebody who's really doing it. What is your perspective on, like, how do you have that conversation now with a guy, typically? And then in the future, how's that conversation going to happen with a young lady?
Yeah. That's such an interesting question. On the male side of things, I think what I tend to do is use real life examples with men because they can relate to that. Mm-hmm. So speaking to maybe somebody that they're familiar with in this space, whether it's another hockey player who has come to the end of his career, and helping them understand the challenges that person faced, because they didn't go inside. They didn't figure out 10 years ago what was important to them, and maybe looking ahead what they might want to do with their future. When their hockey career is this long and their life after sport is this long.
Way much longer.
They didn't do that work. And I've seen all kinds of things. I've seen anxiety. I've seen personal breakdowns. I've seen addictions to sex. I've seen addictions to drugs. I've seen all kinds of things come when that particular player loses that identity. They get lost. They don't know what's next. They don't know who to turn to. And they turn to those dopamine hits. They turn to those things that are instant gratification so that they can still achieve the instant gratification that they receive playing that sport.
Yeah.
And you got to think about, especially male, with the testosterone running through your body and the egos that men have, not in a negative way, but when you're out there on the football field or on the ice, everyone is cheering for you. And one day you turn around and the door is shut behind you and you're not on the field anymore and you're not on the ice anymore and nobody is cheering for you.
Right.
How do you handle that?
Right. And I think your point is excellent that you can't wait until that day to start thinking about how you're going to handle that.
Exactly.
Right. And I think you're making an excellent point that for people watching, and I know some people are polarized by Aaron Rodgers, but I agree with your point wholeheartedly that regardless of what you think about him and his decision making on the field or in the locker room, et cetera, he clearly started the work of figuring out who am I outside of football well before his career was on the downside, right? Where we do see some of this work being done by other professional athletes across other sports. But typically it comes almost at the behest of the urgency of, oh, wow, I'm on my last contract, right? Like, or my team right now is in stuck in a level of mediocrity that we may not make it out of. And I may be a part of a rebuild, right? No matter what the sport is, you never want to be that player who's in your early 30s and you're all of a sudden finding yourself in the middle of a rebuild. And so you now got to start asking yourself like, okay, what am I doing? And I find that a lot of athletes tend to pick, and I'm sure it's a pre-described path that they're told or given by a lot of people in their circles, which is either go to the media route, right, go the coaching route, or some other like sport adjacent route that allows them to still kind of stay close to the sport, but not necessarily have to leave the room completely. But I think you make the great point that the craving and the recognition that comes with having the fandom is the piece you got to prepare for the most.
Yeah, and I think what we have to remember too is not everyone is Aaron Rodgers. Not everyone is Connor McDavid or Austin Matthews or Sidney Crosby. So they might not have those same opportunities come to them when they retire. And what are those people doing? What are those guys doing to deal with those same things? Because they were still part of that environment, part of that testosterone, the ego, the adrenaline. That's all gone away.
And you on that point, you make such a good point because I think people forget or neglect to remember that these players have typically made it to where they were because of extraordinary skill sets they already had. Right. And so it's not like those skill sets go away when they move to the business world or to the media world or to the post-sports world. Aaron Rodgers is a perfect example. I happen to know he has a photographic memory. He can literally recall every game he's ever played in. If you call out a play, he can tell you what actually happened in that play, what the call of the play was, which is, amazing to me. But it shows you that skill set, that's not going to go away because he's not playing football anymore. He'll just use that skill set, theoretically to at his benefit in whatever other pursuit he chooses to engage in. And so I think that's also another point that players need to think of who are watching and listening to us is you have a set of skills that make you really good at your sport. Sometimes it's just the need to figure out how do you best leverage those things that make you really good at what you do in your sport and flip that to either business or social or celebrity status, et cetera. So I love that thought process.
That's such a great point you make. And I think if there are young athletes out there that are going to be watching this and understanding what they should be looking for in an agent, if you're talking to a potential agent that you maybe want to work with in your career and they are not talking about life after sport, I would reconsider that because it's not just about.
I would call Krista.
Thanks, Dana. It's about building your, like you said, that skill set today for what's going to come tomorrow, because your athletic career is here and your life after sport is this long.
I love it. We have gone way too deep on the rapid fire questions, so we're going to transition. I'm going to end this section, though, by saying I think you need to call Krista. I think this is going to probably be an episode where we develop a new catchphrase for a slogan for your advertising, which is call Krista, because I want to now get into why people should call Krista. So are you ready to jump into the main interview section?
Let's do it for sure.
All right, let's jump in. And I honestly do. I want to really start by saying, first, again, thank you for coming on and sharing your just really, interesting and fascinating history and journey to becoming a sports agent on the both professional men's and women's side. So I want to start there and just ask you, can you give our audience a bit of an overview of your journey to professional hockey from a sports agency standpoint?
Sure. I grew up in a really small town in the province next door to me called Saskatchewan, and hockey was really everything in my town that I grew up in, but not for girls. So girls didn't play hockey when I grew up. So I spent a lot of time at the rink watching my brother. I grew up playing other sports. And it was interesting because in a town of 800 people, I really found like I couldn't see outside the borders of where I grew up. I didn't see the opportunities. I didn't see the limitless possibility or the infinite possibility that was available to me, because we were just living in this bubble. And so I didn't even really understand what a sports agent was back when I was a kid. I maybe would have taken an entirely different route in my career, but it landed me to where I am today. So this was obviously my journey that was meant to be. I started my career in marketing, in advertising. And I worked for some really large global advertising agencies at the start of my career. I transitioned over to working for companies who were looking to either build a brand, rebrand, build a marketing team from scratch. I became an executive leader early on in my career, and I just loved helping people and being a strong, confident leader who was there to really develop the skill sets of the young people that I was working with. So that really became innate in me really early on. Around COVID time, I started working for a law firm that brought me in to do exactly that, to do a rebrand, bring all of their marketing efforts in-house, and to build this great marketing team for them. I didn't realize when I first started there that they were having conversations with an NHL agent about investing in his business. I didn't know much about it at the time. I mean, obviously I was a hockey fan growing up, watched hockey my whole life, but never played it, and got involved in this business. They had me build the brand for it. And then we realized the opportunity to actually build personal brands for the players, help them generate off-ice revenue, to start to build, again, that opportunity to create that life after sport while they're still in it. So I joined that agency, was there for about 4 years. That's where I started working with the NHL players. And at the same time, one of the NHL players that I worked with, he introduced me to his sister. And she was a female hockey player at Ohio State. And they were actually looking to co-brand as brother and sister. It was a really interesting concept. So I was super excited to talk to them. And after that conversation wrapped up, he introduced me to his girlfriend, whose name is Ella Shelton, and she's one of the top players in the PWHL today. So I met her at the time. She was interested in building her personal brand. This was long before there were any discussions.
And was she at college level when you met her? She high school? Where was she at?
She was just finishing college, I believe, when we started working together. Yeah. So she
played in college, right?
She played in college.
Yeah.
Yeah, she played in college. Very successful college career. But again, at that time, college was it for these women. There really was.
And when you're saying at that time, for the audience, we're talking 2 years ago, right?
Yeah,
3 years ago?
3 years ago, yeah.
3 years ago. Prior to 3 years ago, give me our audience, because there's a lot of people who don't understand the hockey game. They think they do, but they don't get it. So give them game, Krista. So how does the hockey work in terms of, and women or male, because I think it's fairly similar for up until high school, and then high school, college, and then if you make it to the pros. Just give them a quick synopsis of how it works in hockey.
Yeah, so on the men's side, you'd obviously play your youth hockey. You'd get to the point where, if you have that level of talent, you might get drafted to the American League or the Canadian League at a more junior level. Or you can choose the college route and go play Div 1 in NCAA. Then obviously there's that opportunity to be drafted into the NHL, go through the training camp system. You might be on a two-way contract that puts you between the NHL and the AHL, which is their sort of feeder system and their development league. Or you might be on a one-way NHL contract playing for an NHL team, and your career starts to grow and blossom from there. So there's always been that opportunity for the men for many years. On the women's side, however, college was it. There was no hockey after college unless you're playing for the national women's team. They would
for like Olympics or national competitions, right? But there wasn't even an international women's hockey league. Like basketball, obviously, is the one that comes to mind, where there's a women's international league that women in the U.S. can go international and make some money. Not necessarily as lucrative as the NBA, but it's a bit more. That didn't exist for hockey.
That actually does exist for hockey for women over in Europe. So there are some European women's leagues that have existed for a number of years that some American girls, Canadian girls will go over and play in. The level of hockey isn't quite the same as we see over here. But
What
some
about the
girls,
money? Could you live off of the money, or you still have to be doing something else, working, if you were going to go over and do that?
it depends where you are, but a lot of girls do have to,
Have a
have
job.
that part-time
So really,
career.
there's no professional route, is what we're saying. Prior to 3 or 4
There
years
was no
ago,
professional route.
no professional route. Wow.
No professional route. Then at some point, this league called the PWHL came together.
Mm-hmm.
They were franchised teams, and there was an ownership group, and this sounded like this league was going ahead, and then it all just kind of started to fall apart before it got started. And that was the point where the Walter family came in, bought the assets that existed for this league, and decided to start these conversations around the PWHL. Billy Jean King and Alana Kloss got involved. Some of the key players in the league got involved as well to really make this happen. And that's how it all started. And that was about 2 years ago now that those conversations started happening.
And so the league is a wholly separately owned league from the NHL. It's not an NHL property, correct?
It has nothing to do with the NHL.
Okay.
It's privately owned by the Walter family.
Mm-hmm.
Every single team in the league is also privately owned. So there's no franchise models here.
Okay.
Every team, every player, everyone who works for every team is owned by the PWHL as an entity. Yeah.
Okay, that's good actually for a young league, right? To control its growth and its trajectory, its message, everything. It would seem to me to be a much easier process to do it in that fashion.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing now and hearing, and just people in my own network, like there is appetite to franchise these teams. I know we're
I would think,
quite a number of years away from that.
Yeah.
There are people interested in investing this and getting involved in having their own teams. So yeah.
Do you see the expansion potentially coming more into the U.S. as well?
We actually heard word of expansion talks at the beginning of this second season. They talked about expanding by 2 teams.
Mm-hmm.
They also put out a schedule for what they're calling takeover games. So games that are outside of the markets in which these 6 original teams exist in. So we've seen games happen in Detroit,
that makes sense.
In Detroit, but Denver, Seattle, Vancouver. There's one in Edmonton this weekend.
That makes sense.
Crowds of, like the game I attended in Vancouver, there was more people attending that game than a Vancouver Canucks game, which was incredible. So there's appetite for expansion.
There's definitely appetite.
We don't know exactly if that's going to happen this season, if it'll be 2 teams or 1 team. We hear all kinds of rumors going around on a regular basis, but hoping in the next couple of months we'll know what that expansion looks like, and whether that'll be kind of split between Canada and the US, or if they'll maybe expand by 1 team in Canada, because we are seeing more fan support in this market at this point in time as women's hockey continues to grow. So
let's talk a little bit about, because we just gave a retrospective on your career, how you got to where you are. One of the things I wanted to dial up a little bit, though, or double click on, is specifically the transition that you made in terms of focus of your agency on what kind of player and what league you were going to focus on. So you obviously had a really, really, just great consequential situation of being right at the right place at the right time when the women's league was starting. But you were still working, as you mentioned briefly, with NHL athletes. So talk a little bit more about working with NHL athletes and then making that decision like, hey, I'm going to pivot and really focus on now working with the women in the PWHL.
Yeah, I mean, even at that point, like when this league started formulating, I still didn't have it in my mind that I was going to become an agent. That really wasn't on my radar. I was helping Ella Shelton build her brand, and she obviously started sharing the rumblings about this league formulating with me. I was going to introduce her to her boyfriend's agent, who's incredible. His name's Todd, and she thought that was amazing. And when we started to come towards the draft, I started to get phone calls from GMs without realizing that she had put me as her agent on her expression of interest for the draft. So that's really how this all got started.
Yeah. One player, one relationship, put you down as their agent, and then you were in the seat. And this is a great moment to talk about, because people have these moments in life all the time, right? This was a pivotal moment. You were sitting there. You could have easily called her up and said, hey, I appreciate it. Love the compliment. not something I'm really prepared for, I want to do, etc. Talk me through just quickly. How did you make that decision? What were you was going through, your mind in terms of the variables where you were like, okay, I could stay on the path I'm on, or I could go in and do this?
Yeah, I mean, the first call that I got was a voicemail. I listened to it. I realized it was the GM of New York's team. I still, at that point, didn't know why he was calling me. Couldn't figure it out. Just didn't.
So look, the GM's like, hey, Krista, this is the GM of the New York team. Give me a call back when you get a chance.
Yeah, basically. He's like, I think I know. He goes, I think you know why I'm calling. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, I don't actually know why you're calling. So I called him back, obviously quickly realized why he was calling me. And in the moment, I just, the voice in my head said, you know how to do this. You've been around this for the last 4 years. You know exactly what to do. And really, you're just representing Ella's best interests. And that's what you do best. So I had that conversation. I got on with all the other GMs and realized, okay, this is really just about me gathering the information, making sure these girls know they have somebody in their corner, an advocate for them, and talking them through this process. So I reached back out to a couple of the other girls that I knew that were probably struggling with the same lack of information and lack of direction that Ella had been struggling with. And it kind of just went from there. And to be honest with you, even in that first season, I represented 3 girls. It wasn't until about halfway through that season where I realized, I really enjoy helping them. I really enjoy being there for them. I was supporting them on the branding side, which a lot of other girls' agents weren't doing. They weren't investing.
Didn't have that skill set.
Yeah. And that's when I just realized, okay, I think I could make this a thing. And, it became more for me about helping these women, realizing that they really didn't have a lot of information and they didn't have anyone in their corners. And I didn't want them to be stuck with a traditional NHL agent that I knew wasn't going to treat them in the way that they deserved to be treated because they weren't making them hundreds of thousands of dollars at this point.
I love that.
To have somebody in their corner that was doing it for the right reasons and not in it to make a buck, but in it to be part of this with them. As soon as that first draft came around, the energy behind that was so incredible. I couldn't not be a part of it. I couldn't not, look towards the future and say, even though I'm not playing the game myself, I'm still paving the way for young women out there to be inspired to play this game or be an agent or be involved in women's hockey in some way. And so that's really been my whole mantra, my mentality behind this whole thing is I'm in this to pave the way for every other woman that comes behind us. And these players are doing the same thing.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for giving me that answer because I think people do, have these moments in life where a pivot, is essentially what is happening. You're presented with an opportunity. You could take it or you can stick to your, current path. And I always tell people there, you never want to walk away from an opportunity and 5 years later say, man, I wish I would have, right? I wish I would have maybe taken that opportunity. And so that leads me to my next question is as you took this opportunity, natural pivot in a way, I would say, because it felt like everything you had done in your career to a degree, it almost led up to this creation of this league and your involvement in it. And so now you're working with a couple of players in season 1 and just based on your experience of previous players you worked with. Tell me, what are some of the biggest mistakes and problems that athletes create or find themselves in when they set to start creating and focusing on their personal brand?
I think that a lot of athletes don't have the right guidance and they don't have the right focus. And it kind of goes back to our earlier discussion around really understanding who they are. I never recommend to clients that they just take random deals that come their way if it doesn't feel authentic to them. Because if it doesn't feel authentic to them, it's not going to be an authentic relationship. And they sort of lose themselves in that. So really being strategic and paying attention to the things they get themselves involved in and making sure it's something that they're passionate about. And you asked a question earlier that we went in a different direction, but the women in terms of the way they differ from the men is they want to shine their personalities. They want their light to be seen. They are active, they are engaged. They will do anything to make an extra $5,000 when they're only getting paid $40,000 a year. And so the passion is different behind this. But they've done that work. They've done the work to sort of peel back those layers and understand, okay, what do I really want to be a part of?
And they usually done that work, I guess, almost organically with that generation through as they came through kind of social media in high school and in the college, they kind of developed a bit more of an understanding of their personal identity. Because I agree with you that young women have a much more developed sense of their social media and personal impact from a branding standpoint than young men usually do coming in to my office. But I want to follow that up then and ask, given that difference and given some of the classic or the typical mistakes that you see made, what would you say are some of the differences between some of the early mistakes and missteps that some of the younger guys make in building their personal athletic brand versus some of the young ladies who definitely feel like they're out there more aggressively developing it and may have some missteps or some things that they may do incorrectly even in that proactive approach. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, the women, again, just because they didn't have this professional league to lean on and move into, I think they were starting to do some of that work prior because this didn't exist for them before. It was like, okay, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to play hockey, I'll play for my national team, I'll go to an Olympics, hope to win gold, and that'll be it, right?
Yeah.
So they were already focusing on their careers and what they wanted to be a part of and focus into and lean into. The guys have always had that there. So I don't think they've taken the time to do that inner work, like we talked about earlier, and separating those identities of athletes and human being early on enough in their careers because they've always had that professional system to lean into. I found too with the men's side versus the women is that the men have always had people there telling them what to do. They tell them when to wake up, when they eat, what they eat, where they go, when they sleep, where they travel. Everything is taken care of for them. So I find that a lot of the guys are sort of expecting that everything will always be taken care of for them.
And they don't have to really think about that part of it, right? Exactly. Somebody else will figure it out for them.
Exactly.
That actually one other point you brought up earlier, and I know being an agent, you have to likely deal with this a lot. So I'm not trying to put you in hot water here, but I'm curious on two things: is the influence piece. You inherit athletes who I think primarily, my assumption is, have parents, either mom, dad, or both. As a momager, right, a dadager, or a combination of somebody in the family that's very involved and influential in their decision making and in their view probably of who they think they are.
Yeah.
And then also, I think as you graduated to collegiate and pro, you're now engaging with women who have a significant other who also has a really outsized at times influence on their view of who they are and what deals make sense, et cetera.
Yeah.
How do you manage that, Krista, especially when, frankly, the advice is not good?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if it's the hockey community or I've just been fortunate enough to attract people that hold the same values as I do and we align with those core values in the same way. But I've been fortunate enough to not have a lot of momagers or dadagers or however you want to label them. But I think outside of that too, the brand uncovery process that I take my clients through to, again, peel back the layers of the onion and discover who they are deep at their core, we involve their families in that. Because I think as individual human beings, we often only see what's in front of us about ourselves and we don't see this stuff behind here, or maybe this thing that happened when they were a kid. So, we involve their friends, their siblings, their partners, their spouses, their parents are all involved in that process. And I think because the parents are involved in that process, it allows them to see, okay, my child's in great hands. I can step back and let them take the lead on their career and their life.
Can we hear that again?
I think as individual human beings, we often only see what's in front of us about ourselves and we don't see this stuff behind here, or maybe this thing that happened when they were a kid. So, we involve their friends, their siblings, their partners, their spouses, their parents are all involved in that process. And I think because the parents are involved in that process, it allows them to see, okay, my child's in great hands. I can step back and let them take the lead on their career and their life. And I've seen that a lot with these young women's hockey players in college is their parents are kind of sort of pushing the baby duck forwards to say, okay, take a step on your own. We've gotten you here. You go out and find an agent that you resonate with. So oftentimes these clients will say, you know, my parents are allowing me to go and do this on my own and choose the person who I feel I'm going to work best with. I've met with very little parents, actually, to be honest. So I guess I've been fortunate in that way.
That is another call Krista moment. Call because clearly Krista's doing something right, and her clientele, I think, would be supportive to the reality that if you can talk directly to the client, to the athlete, and the communication is relative to what they're looking for, which is help from you to improve their personal brand, perfect match. So I want to ask a follow-up question to that, because I think one of the things that I have seen here in the U.S., especially again as a girl dad, I coach my daughter in basketball and in track when they were in high school. I've watched the development of women's professional sports here in the country and the fights for equity, especially when it comes to fair pay, equal pay. Shout outs to the women's U.S. soccer team that really, I think, did a great job over the last couple of years of advancing that topic, not just for soccer, but across multiple women's sports.
Yeah.
But now we're in this place where brand sponsorships clearly are key drivers, not just for revenue for the leagues, but for personal revenue for the players. And there's long been this, gap between men's sports and sponsorships and deals and women's sports. And I would imagine that is equally challenging right now with the NWHL versus the NHL. And now you've got this added dynamic of social media and all of the, call it the voyeuristic elements of what that brings to the table. Krista, what's your advice and your, I guess, kind of strategy for navigating, especially with a female athlete, navigating through fit with the brand and the sponsorship that especially when it comes to women, more and more now seems to be focused on their physical attributes and largely swerving into these sexual driven campaigns and brand matchups. What do you say to that in terms of how to navigate that path for your athlete, and just in general how athletes trying to build their brands, female athletes trying to build their brands, should consider those types of offers and those types of opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I often, the brand uncovery process that we do is so incredible. You walk away with a brand Bible, as I like to call it, and it's like your guide, it's your North Star. You always look back at that and go, is this in alignment with my core values? If it's not, you decline those opportunities. But I always often also, I mean, I'm there to guide my clients. So any opportunities that come in, I'm vetting those opportunities. And if it doesn't feel right in my gut, I know it's not going to feel right in any of my clients' guts. And, unfortunately, that does happen quite frequently. We get those opportunities or have those conversations around, steering it in a very sexual nature. And we stay away from those opportunities all day long, because to me, they're incredibly inauthentic to who these women are. And what my job and the rest of us working in this league is to protect these women. And that's what I hold very dear is again, I treat them like my own family, like they'd be my own daughters.
Yeah.
And I would protect them at all costs from this kind of stuff. In fact, we work with a company who does social listening for us and protects these women from, hate comments, sexual comments, on social media platforms. So we are taking strides to protect them from these types of things. But again, I would always encourage an athlete to really sit in their heart and sit in their gut. And if something doesn't feel right to them, don't ever follow the money, because the money will come to you in another way.
Yep.
If you're seeking a big deal or an opportunity, don't take the first one that falls into your lap because it's right in front of you. Take the one that feels right in your gut. And if you decline that first one, the universe is going to send you something in its place that's much better suited for you. That's always the case.
Whoa. We need to hear that one more time.
If you're seeking a big deal or an opportunity, don't take the first one that falls into your lap because it's right in front of you. Take the one that feels right in your gut. And if you decline that first one, the universe is going to send you something in its place that's much better suited for you. That's always the case.
That advice and we will probably rewind and replay that advice as part of this episode, because it is something that I think especially young athletes are struggling with right now, is the fight between how do I get to the viral content? How do I get to the most likes? How do I get to ultimately the most money? Or as the young folks say, get to the bag. But are you sacrificing your integrity? Are you sacrificing your brand to do it? And I want to go back to something Krista said, because again, it's something that people hear about, don't quite understand what exactly is in it and what it does. Krista, tell them a little bit more about the brand Bible that you create for your clients and what actually that brand Bible contains and why it's so important. And I wanted to just go back there quickly because it is such a useful tool. And I encourage my listeners, especially those of you who are considering building your personal athletic brand, to really reach out to Krista, especially with regard to getting this support to build your brand Bible, because it can be so critical. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure, yeah. This really is your guide, and it's your tool to basically navigate the world of your personal brand. And we do that, again, as I mentioned, through the brand uncovery workshop, where we involve those people that are closest to you so you can get all of those perspectives being part of this. Mm-hmm. We're peeling back those layers. I always use the analogy of a house when I talk about this. A lot of clients come to me and say, I want a logo. I said, okay, well, let's talk first about how a brand is not a logo, okay? A brand is, your foundation, your purpose, your core. And that's where we start from. And so I always use the analogy of a house. You would never go in and decorate, add a sofa, put up artwork, paint walls until you have the foundation laid of that house and the frame put up. And so that's the work that we do in the brand uncovery process is building that foundation.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes how many young people actually understand how to build a house. That might be part of the problem. We say foundational and the kids are like, I got all my drapes figured out. I got the wallpaper. I know what I'm going to do with the floors, Mr. Ammons. I'm like, nah, man, I mean foundational, like the actual foundation. You got to pour the foundation, put the frame up, put the plumbing in, electrical, et cetera. So continue to that point, Krista, as they, it's first about coming in and building that foundation, and that brand Bible process takes them through, or you take them through a process that results in the brand Bible.
Absolutely. I get to know them so deeply that I'm able to walk away and help them formulate what their purpose is, what their value proposition is, which is what makes them unique, their secret sauce, what those important core values are, what the tone of voice of their brand should be, because it's got to align with who they are really deep inside. This is really us uncovering their soul. Mm-hmm. Put out there into the world, and it's got to be really authentic. Mm-hmm. Talk about those core messages. We create that around this as well, as what are the things that they really want people to know about them. The question that I always ask in our workshop is, you only have one chance to make a first impression. What do you want people to know? What do you want somebody to walk away from a conversation with you knowing about you if they never get to meet you again? And so the exercises that we do in the workshop are really impactful and super insightful. And you're digging really, really deep. A lot of people find it to be a really spiritual or therapeutic experience, especially when you're involving people who are close to you, who love you and want to be part of this with you. So that's the place that we start. And once you have that brand Bible in place, obviously the logo and the fancy decorating of everything comes
from it.
Yeah. And we take it in whatever direction you want to go in. If merchandise is really important to you, if philanthropy is really important to you, you want to create a foundation, or I've got a client who that's her whole brand is helping other people. She will often make money from a brand deal and give it away to somebody else. She'll say, can you help me send this gift card that I got from this hockey brand because I want to help this family back in Ohio buy hockey equipment.
Wow.
That's where her brand has led her to be.
I love that.
We also use that brand Bible to basically help brands get to know you. So brands will come to us if we're talking about a potential deal, like, tell me everything I know about this athlete. Okay, go. And they come back to us and say, wow, that was absolutely incredible. I know everything I need to know about this client. We would love to work with them and build this authentic partnership.
Love that. Founders need to listen to this because I am, in previous episodes, founders who have watched this show know that I push the brand Bible process for founders and brands, especially because of what Krista said. Athlete brands are going to come with their own brand Bible. You need to take their brand Bible, take yours, and see if there's some synchronicity, right? If there is complete clash between their brand and what they're about and your brand and what your brand is about, they're not likely going to be an effective sponsorship relationship for you because their audience tunes into them for completely different reasons than your audience does. So it's another reason why I think both athletic brands need to heed Krista's advice and founders, because that junction, that call it universal language that both sides can actually communicate in is going to be found in that brand Bible. Yes. So really, really great advice. Look, this has really been an amazing conversation, but as always, before I wrap up, I want to be able to give, because Krista, we've touched on a couple of key areas, but we didn't actually specify, given your span of scope and kind of where you work right now. You're in Canada, but talk to my audience a little bit for those of the people who are interested in working with you or potentially retaining your services. What is your scope of control and kind of focus, and how they can actually connect with you in the future about your services?
Absolutely. So my two businesses right now are Laura Athletes, spelled Lora. Laura means to dream. So that's why that brand was created under that. That's my women's hockey agency. So if you are an aspiring young women's hockey player out there, I start working with women, as early as age 15, all the way up to that sort of college professional level. And you could be anywhere. I'm in Calgary, but I travel all over to see you. We work together virtually. We're constantly on video calls and calls together. So geographically, just open to working with anyone, anywhere is possible. And then my branding business, where I obviously source out those opportunities for the women's hockey players, but also my NHL clients like Jeremy Roenick and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Mario Ferraro and Zach Hymans of the world, is called Dan Brands. And if you're just interested in that side and you're interested in building your personal brand, we can help you do that. And then taking it a step further, if you're interested in building your, off ice, off field, off court revenue, we can help you do that as well. And start to build that life after sport. Always be thinking about that in the back of your mind.
I love that. So remember, people, you just heard that Laura and Dan brand, and that was a bit of a humble brag. Let me just rewind for you. That was a Jeremy Roenick was in that stable of athletes that Krista works with. So that does legitimize her. If you were kind of on the fence or thinking maybe I might have Jeremy Roenick attached to Krista, and either one of her two services and offerings could be a fit for you. So again, Krista, I so appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to jump on the show with me and demystify athletic branding, especially in women's professional hockey. I and you have already talked about, I want to have you come back on in the future to continue to keep us updated, not just on the growth of the league, but I am fascinated and want to continue to learn more about how you support and continue to support these growing brands in the Canadian market. Despite what is going on up top in our country right now and all the rhetoric, this is a brother who loves my Canadian brothers and sisters, and I want to continue to find ways to partner with you guys and bring your culture and the things that you're doing in branding on screen and let that my audience share in a part of that. So again, I cannot thank you enough for joining the show today.
Thank you so much, Dana. It was a wonderful conversation, and I'm super excited to come back to chat more.
We can't wait to have you back. And again, as a reminder to my audience, we will be posting Krista's episode on the brandblueprint.biz, not .com, because we're about that biz. So make sure if you're looking for Krista's information after the show, you can actually find the link and go to our website where you will see all of the different links to her platforms and the ability to connect to her agency as well. And then lastly, do as we always ask you, share, like, subscribe. And if you don't do at least one of those things, I tend to think you might be a hater. Please don't be a hater. Please follow our content, share it, and also make sure you go out and follow Krista on her respective platforms as well. Thanks again for joining the Brand Blueprint. We can't wait to see you on the next episode. Have a great one. Thanks for joining us on the Brand Blueprint journey. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms to stay updated. Watch the full episodes on our YouTube channel for an in-depth experience. Don't forget to subscribe to our website at thebrandblueprint.biz. for exclusive content and materials. We're everywhere you need us to be.